Welcome, everyone, to the Deep Dive. It's really great to have you with us today. We're setting out to explore one of those truly foundational texts, the kind that tackles wisdom, but also digs right into life's biggest, sometimes most unsettling questions. We've all been there, right? Life throws you something completely unexpected, maybe devastating, and you're left just reeling, trying to make sense of it all. You might find yourself looking up, asking, okay, God, what's going on here? Where are you? When everything I thought I understood about, about your justice and order just feels like it's falling apart. And in those moments, so many of us, we turn to the Bible. We're looking for answers, sure, but maybe also comfort, just a way to frame the chaos. And inside that amazing library of books, there aren't many that spark quite as many questions or as much wrestling, maybe even confusion, as the book of Job. So that's really our mission for this deep dive. We want to journey into Job together, and we're going to zoom right in on those first few chapters. The introduction. Because, honestly, it's often really misunderstood, misread even. Our goal is to kind of peel back those common misconceptions, things that maybe surprisingly stop us from really getting the profound wisdom Job actually has for us. Think of us as, I don't know, guides on this journey, exploring this ancient but still incredibly relevant text together, sharing the discovery, wrestling with the deep stuff, like friends figuring things out. I gotta say, for a lot of people reading Job, those first two chapters, they feel like a mental roller coaster. It's a puzzle almost. The perspective shifts so suddenly, and boom, you're hit with these deep, sometimes really uncomfortable questions about God's character, about suffering. And right away you realize this book isn't handing out easy answers, not at all. It kind of asks us to sit with the discomfort, to think about things we might rather avoid.
You've really hit on something crucial there. It's fascinating and honestly a real challenge for modern readers how often they trip up right at the start. That whole narrative introduction, especially that conversation, between God and the Satan. It's just so often misinterpreted. People read it through the lens of, well, later ideas, and it can completely derail their understanding of what the book's actually about. It just obscures the main points. So our aim today, it's really to bring some clarity to those opening chapters, a good dose of it, because if we can get a solid foundation there, understand what the prologue is trying to say, and maybe just as importantly, what it isn't trying to say, then you'll be so much better prepared to dive into those amazing poetic dialogues that are really the heart of the book. It's like, making sure you've got the right map before you start a tough hike. Without that clarity at the beginning, the whole journey can feel really confusing.
Okay, so let's really get into it. The story kicks off not with some abstract idea, but with this incredibly detailed picture of the main character, Job. That's Job 1, verses 1 to 5. And the text doesn't just say he's a good guy.
Yeah.
It uses really specific, powerful words. He's blameless and upright, a man who feared God and shunned evil. This isn't just your average righteous person. No, he's presented as like the absolute peak of human goodness, a moral example for everyone. And the text really emphasizes his piety, doesn't it? Tells us how he offered sacrifices for his kids, just in case. Just in case they might have, sinned in their hearts during their parties or something. Think about that level of devotion. It's not just saying a quick prayer. This is a man who's so spiritually tuned in.
Yeah.
He's actively interceding for his grown children for sins they might not have even committed, sins they might have just thought about.
Exactly. It shows this incredibly deep concern for their spiritual well-being. They're standing before God. He's all about holiness, ritual purity, which back then was directly tied to being in God's favor. And this portrayal, it's just unparalleled, really, in the Bible.
So why? Why paint him in such glowing terms right at the start?
Well, that's the key, isn't it? This immediate, almost over-the-top description of Job's righteousness. It sets the stakes incredibly high for the whole story. Think about it. If this guy, the one called blameless, upright, God-fearing, avoids evil if he suffers catastrophically, then what does that actually say about God's world, how God runs things? It immediately throws up this huge theological question mark, this tension that the entire book is going to wrestle with relentlessly. So painting him as extremely righteous isn't just color, it's absolutely essential for the whole thought experiment the book is setting up. The author needs someone who is, for the sake of the argument, perfectly righteous. Even God confirms it later. It forces us, the readers, right from the get-go to ask, okay, what happens when a truly good person faces absolute undeserved disaster? What does that reveal about God?
Right. And then, just as we're getting comfortable with Job on earth, bam, the scene just shifts dramatically. We're instantly transported from Job's peaceful, wealthy life to God's divine counsel, a heavenly throne room. That's in Job 1, verses 6 and 7. It's this incredibly vivid image, God as a sovereign king, holding court, gathering his heavenly team, the sons of God, for what feels like a regular meeting, like a cosmic staff meeting.
Just feel like that. And this picture, God holding court in heaven, it's actually not unique to Job at all. The Old Testament often shows God this way, ruling, making decisions with this divine assembly around him. It shows his active governance over everything. You see it in places like 1 Kings 22, where Micaiah sees God on his throne with the host of heaven standing by, or Psalm 103, praising the angels, God's ministers who do his will. It's a common biblical picture. God isn't distant. He's actively involved with his heavenly staff. But the really crucial detail here in Job, the one that often throws people, is that among these sons of God reporting for duty, there's this specific figure called the Satan.
The Satan. Not just Satan, but the Satan.
Exactly. With the definite article in Hebrew, ha-Satan, and his presence there, it's not just incidental, it's absolutely central to understanding what this book is really trying to do, the challenge it's setting up. It paints a picture of how God runs things that's, well, maybe more complex than we usually imagine.
Imagine being a fly on the wall in that meeting.
Yeah.
It's probably not what most of us picture when we think about how God runs the universe, right? Okay, this brings us right to probably the biggest sticking point, the most common misunderstanding we really need to clear up. When we read the Satan in Job, I think most of us almost automatically picture the character from later Christian theology, capital S Satan.
Ah.
You know, the ultimate evil being, God's archenemy, the tempter, the source of all evil we talk about in spiritual warfare. So the big question is that who we're meeting here in Job's introduction? Is it the same figure?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And this is exactly where understanding the original Hebrew is not just helpful, it's absolutely essential if we don't want to misread the whole thing.
Yeah.
See, the Hebrew word Satan, in its original context, it's not actually a proper name. It's not like Michael or Gabriel. It's a noun. Sometimes it even functions like a verb, and it literally means adversary or opponent or one who opposes or even accuser.
So like a job title, almost. Not a personal name.
Exactly. More like a role or a function. The adversary or the accuser. And this distinction, this nuance, it just gets lost, completely flattened out when most English translations capitalize the S. They turn a job description into a name, which imports a whole lot of later theological baggage. But if we trace how this word Satan is actually used elsewhere in the Old Testament, it becomes really clear. It's fascinating, actually. Think about King Solomon. Towards the end of his reign, things start going downhill. And 1 Kings 11 tells us God raised up an adversary, Hebrew, Satan, against him, Hadad the Edomite. And then a few verses later, another one, Rezin, son of Eliada. He's also called a Satan against Solomon. These were human political opponents, adversaries.
Okay, so humans could be a Satan.
Absolutely. Even King David. In 1 Samuel 29, the Philistine commanders are worried about David fighting with them. They say, "Won't he become a Satan to us in battle?" Meaning an opponent, someone fighting against them. And it can also mean someone bringing an accusation in a legal setting, like a prosecutor. Psalm 109 talks about having an accuser, Hebrew. Satan stand at someone's right hand in judgment. But here's the part that really drives the point home, I think. It often surprises people. Remember the story of Balaam and his talking donkey in Numbers 22? Who stands in Balaam's way, blocking his path, acting as a Satan, an adversary?
Wasn't it an angel?
Exactly. It was the angel of the Lord. God's own messenger, acting on God's authority, is described as performing the function of a Satan, an adversary, to oppose Balaam.
Wow. Okay, so even God's angel can act as a Satan.
Precisely. It powerfully shows that Satan in the Old Testament describes a role, a function being an adversary or accuser, not necessarily an inherently evil identity. So this figure, the Satan who shows up in Job 1 and 2, he's most likely not the same fully developed, singular evil figure we call Satan in the New Testament. He's fulfilling a specific role within God's counsel.
That distinction role versus name that really changes everything about how we read this scene, doesn't it? It means the Satan isn't some independent evil force running wild. He's part of the system, a functionary in God's court, bringing a challenge. That's a very different picture.
It is a profoundly different picture, and it fits with the only other place in the Old Testament where we see this specific phrasing, the Satan. That's in Zechariah chapter 3. And guess where that scene takes place? Also in the heavenly courtroom. In Zechariah's vision, the Satan is there, accusing Joshua the high priest. Joshua's wearing dirty clothes, symbolizing Israel's sin. The Satan is basically saying, look, he's guilty.
Okay, so he's acting like a prosecutor again.
Exactly. And notice God's response. Does God fight the Satan? No. God addresses the accusation. He says, essentially, yes, Israel was guilty, but their exile was the punishment. I'm choosing to forgive. And He orders Joshua to be given clean clothes, symbolizing restoration and a new beginning. So even in Zechariah, the Satan isn't portrayed as evil or sinister. He's raising a legitimate point. Joshua is symbolically unclean. God responds not by battling evil, but by demonstrating grace and justice in response to the accusation.
Wow. Okay. This really reframes those first chapters of Job. It's not the big cosmic showdown between good and evil that maybe we grew up thinking it was.
Not in the way we usually conceive it, no. It's more like a legal challenge or maybe an internal review within God's administration. The focus is on testing a principle, not fighting a war.
So that leads us right into the actual conversation, the challenge itself. Job 1, verses 8 to 10. God points Job out, right? He basically boasts about him. Have you considered my servant Job? There's no one like him on earth, blameless, upright, fears God, shuns evil. It's this glowing review.
A perfect performance review, you could say.
Yeah. And then the Satan steps up and asks this. Oh, it's a really bold question, isn't it? It's almost cheeky.
Yeah.
He basically says, does Job fear God for nothing? Like, is his goodness really genuine?
Yeah.
Or is it just because you've blessed him so much?
It's incredibly provocative. And notice the specific challenge. It's not just, is Job faking it? It's a direct challenge to God's policy. Haven't you put a hedge around him, he asks, protected him, blessed everything he does? The implication is profound. If being good always leads to blessing and protection, can anyone truly serve God selflessly? Or is it just good business? Is piety just a transaction?
So it's not just about Job's personal motives. It's questioning the whole system.
Exactly. It questions whether God's system of rewarding the righteous actually works, or if it inadvertently corrupts the very devotion it's meant to encourage. John Walton, the Old Testament scholar, puts this really well. He points out that we usually ask, why do good people suffer? But the Satan here flips it. He asks, essentially, why should good people prosper?
Well, why should they prosper?
Yeah.
That's counterintuitive.
It is. It suggests that maybe prosperity itself can be a problem, potentially undermining genuine faith. It turns the whole book on its head, making us think about questions we didn't even know we should be asking. It's a challenge to how we think God's justice operates.
Okay, this is huge. Because like I said, so many of us learn this story as, well, as God and Satan making a bet, a cosmic wager with Job stuck in the middle like some unlucky pawn. But that's really not what the text is describing at all, is it?
No, not remotely, and that's such a critical misunderstanding to clear up. We have to remember what kind of literature the Book of Job is. It's ancient Israelite wisdom literature. It's designed to explore deep questions, poetically, philosophically. Its main goal isn't to give us a technical manual on angels or demons or a play-by-play of a cosmic war. That scene in the heavenly court, it's not meant to be a literal transcript of how heaven functions or the origin story of evil. Think of it more like the setup. Bible Project guys like Tim Mackey describe it well. It's like a glimpse into the divine control room where the big questions about God's justice are being debated. The Satan figure in this literary context is really the catalyst. He's there to start the thought experiment.
A thought experiment. Explain that a bit more.
Sure. It's like the author is setting up a hypothetical scenario. What if? What if a perfectly righteous man suffers terribly? What does that reveal? It's not necessarily describing something that literally happened exactly this way in heaven. It's a literary device to make us grapple with tough theological problems. The Satan isn't the main character here with his own evil agenda. He serves the plot. He voices the challenge that kicks everything off. And importantly, as John Walton also emphasizes, this prologue isn't actually explaining why Job suffers. Job himself never finds out about this heavenly conversation.
Right, he has no idea.
Exactly, and knowing wouldn't have helped his pain anyway. The prologue isn't for Job's comfort. It's for our understanding. It sets the stage for the real exploration of the issues. The book isn't trying to teach us celestial mechanics. It's trying to challenge our assumptions about God's justice right here on Earth. The real answers, or maybe the real perspective shift, comes much later in God's speeches at the end.
Okay, so if it's not a bet, not a cosmic fight explanation, what is the big question this whole introduction forces us to think about? What are we supposed to be grappling with?
It pushes us right up against this really uncomfortable question. Is God's system of rewarding the righteous actually wise? Is it truly just if it might taint our motives? And it forces us to ask other hard questions too, like, can truly terrible things happen to people who absolutely positively do not deserve it?
Yeah.
And conversely, can people who seem, well, pretty awful actually succeed and prosper in God's world without getting immediately struck down? And if those things can happen, what does that tell us about God? About his character, his plans? Can we really judge God's justice based only on what we see? Based on who seems to be winning or losing in life? The book deliberately throws us a curveball. Here's a man, Job, who God himself says is blameless, suffering for no reason. That's God's own phrase in Job 2.3. Can that really happen in a world run by a good and just God? That's the massive question mark the prologue leaves hanging, setting up the whole debate that follows.
Wow, okay. This is deep stuff. And it really challenges a lot of common assumptions. We know this is probably sparking a lot of thoughts for you listening. And we'd genuinely love to hear them. What's your initial reaction to thinking about the Satan this way as more of a role and accuser? Did anything we talked about surprise you? Have you read Job differently before? Jump into the comments below and share your thoughts. Let's keep this conversation going because wrestling with these texts together is so valuable. And hey, while you're down there, if you're finding this deep dive helpful, if you're enjoying exploring God's Word like this, please do hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really makes a difference and helps us reach more people who are looking for this kind of understanding. Thanks so much. All right, so we move past the prologue and we dive into these long dialogues between Job and his three friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, Zophar. And honestly, reading chapters 3 through 27, it can feel a bit like being stuck on a hamster wheel, can't it?
Oh, absolutely. Round and round they go.
Yeah. The arguments seem to repeat, they circle back, it's dense, and you don't feel like they're getting anywhere.
It can be frustrating to read, for sure.
But there's this brilliant framework from a Jewish scholar named Matitya Hutsavat that really helps unlock why they're stuck, why the debate feels so circular. He basically identified three core beliefs, three claims about God and Job that were floating around back then. And the tension is, you could really only hold on to two of them at the same time. It created this impossible bind.
That's right. Savat's framework is incredibly insightful. It explains why neither Job nor his friends can ever really win the argument, why they talk past each other, they're trapped in a logical corner. Let me lay out those three claims, because they really are the bedrock of the whole dilemma in the book. First, God is just and good. This is fundamental. God's nature is inherently righteous, fair, benevolent. He always acts for the good. His moral compass is perfect.
Okay, standard belief makes sense.
Second, the retribution principle. This is the idea that God has set up the world like a predictable moral machine. Good deeds get rewarded, blessings, prosperity. Evil deeds get punished, suffering, hardship, a direct cause and effect. And this wasn't some minor idea, it was a huge assumption in ancient wisdom thinking. It gave life a sense of order, predictability.
Yeah, and we still kind of think like that today, don't we? We want the world to work that way. Good things for good people, bad for bad.
We absolutely do. It feels right, even if reality often looks different.
Yeah.
And the third claim, Job's innocence. This states that Job has done absolutely nothing wrong to deserve the nightmare he's living through. And crucially, this isn't just Job saying, I'm innocent. The narrator tells us he's blameless in chapter 1, and even God himself confirms it in chapter 2, verse 3, saying Job suffers for no reason. That's key. God validates Job's innocence.
Okay, so those are the three claims. God is just, retribution is real, Job is innocent. And you said you can only hold two.
Within their worldview, yes, that's the bind.
So how do the friends handle this? When they see Job suffering so terribly, which two do they pick?
The friends. They cling on to numbers 1 and 2 like lifelines. They absolutely unshakably believe, 1, God is just and good, A and D, 2, the retribution principle is how God runs the world. Always.
Okay.
So, if they start with those two non-negotiables, what's the only possible conclusion they can reach about Job?
Well, if God is just, and justice means punishing bad deeds, and Job is suffering horribly, then Job must have done something bad, even if it's hidden.
Exactly. Their logic from their starting point forces them there. It's brutal, it's wrong according to the book, but it's consistent with their premises. That's why they keep hammering Job. Confess, admit what you did wrong. Because in their system, that's the only way to make sense of his suffering while upholding God's justice and the retribution principle.
And yeah, we can relate to that instinct, can't we? When bad stuff happens, don't we often jump to, what did I do? Or why is God punishing me them? It's that attempt to find a cause, to make it make sense within that retribution framework.
It's a very human response. We crave order and explanation.
But Job is living the reality. He knows his innocence. So how does he navigate these three claims? Which two does he hold on to?
Job is in agony, partly because he's caught in the same trap, but from a different angle. He holds fiercely onto 3, his innocence. He knows he hasn't done anything to deserve this. He knows it in his bones. And at least initially, he also largely accepts 2, the retribution principle. That's how he thought the world worked too, that God rewards good and punishes evil.
So if he holds on to his innocence and the idea of retribution, where does that leave him regarding claim number 1?
Exactly. It leads him to a terrifying place. If he's innocent, and if the world is supposed to work by retribution, then the only explanation left is that, 1, God isn't just. Or maybe God isn't good. Or maybe God is just, arbitrary, capricious, even incompetent, unable to manage the universe according to his own rules.
Horrifying for him. He's questioning God's very character.
He absolutely is. His experience is forcing him to confront the possibility that the God he knew and trusted isn't who he thought he was. He feels betrayed by the system or by God himself. That's the source of his deepest anguish and his angry cries towards God.
And this right here, this is where the book is so incredibly clever, because it pushes us, the readers, to see something that neither Job nor his friends can see clearly at this point.
Yes, it makes us question the assumption they both share.
Which is
The retribution principle itself. They're all stuck, going in circles from chapter 3 to 27, precisely because they all fundamentally assume that all suffering is punishment and all prosperity is reward. They can't imagine another possibility.
But we, the readers, because we saw the prologue, we know Job suffers for no reason.
Exactly. So the book nudges us to consider, what if, 1, God is just and good, A and E, 3, Job is truly innocent, but maybe, just maybe, to the retribution principle, while maybe generally true or often observed, is not the whole story. Maybe it's not a rigid, exhaustive explanation for absolutely everything that happens in God's good but complex world.
So the book isn't necessarily saying retribution doesn't exist at all, but that it's not the only factor, or not always immediate.
Precisely. It's suggesting that reality and God's ways are more complex, more mysterious than that simple formula allows. What if suffering isn't always direct punishment? What if blessing isn't always a direct reward?
That's a huge challenge to a core piece of how many of us think about faith and life. It's hard to let go of that neat equation.
It is incredibly hard, but the book forces us to consider it. It opens the door to a more mature, more nuanced understanding of God's sovereignty and how he interacts with our world, especially in the face of suffering that doesn't seem to make sense. It's an invitation to move beyond simplistic answers.
Okay, so let's circle back and kind of tie this together. That heavenly scene in Job 1 and 2, the one with God and the Satan, we've seen now it's really not about laying out the power struggle between God and some ultimate evil force.
Not at all. Its purpose is much more literary and theological. The Satan, as we discussed, is almost like a necessary plot device, a cardboard cutout, you might even say, in this context. His one job, his crucial function, is to voice that challenge. Does Job fear God for nothing? That question is the spark that ignites the whole book's thought experiment.
So he doesn't have independent power, he's just playing a role for the story.
Exactly. He operates entirely within God's sovereign permission. He serves the literary need to raise the central, difficult questions about justice, suffering, and motivation. The prologue sets up these incredibly tough questions perfectly, but deliberately doesn't give us a simple answer for Job's suffering right then and there. It's context for us, the readers, not an explanation for Job.
Right. And those dialogues we just talked about, Job and his friends going back and forth in chapters 3 to 27, they definitely amplify the questions. They show the struggle. But like we said, they don't solve anything. They stay stuck.
They absolutely stay stuck. Because the resolution, the deeper wisdom, doesn't come from human arguments, however smart or passionate they are. Looking at the book's whole structure, the real shift, the movement towards resolution, only starts much later. You get a glimpse in Job 28, that beautiful poem about wisdom, how it's hidden, how only God truly knows where it is. That starts to change the perspective. But the real breakthrough comes in God's speeches, starting in chapter 38, when God finally answers Job out of the whirlwind.
And what does God say? Does he finally explain why Job suffered?
That's the fascinating thing. He doesn't. He never gives Job a direct answer to the why question. Instead, God takes Job on this virtual tour of the cosmos. He talks about creation, about Behemoth and Leviathan, about the vastness and complexity of the universe that Job can't possibly comprehend. It's not an explanation, it's a perspective shift. God basically shows Job how incredibly intricate and wise his running of the world is, far beyond human understanding or judgment.
So it's less about the reason for suffering and more about trusting the wisdom of the one in charge.
Exactly. It moves the focus from finding neat answers to trusting God's character and his unsearchable wisdom, even when things don't make sense from our limited viewpoint. It sets the stage for a much deeper, more mature faith that isn't based on simple formulas. It's about trusting the who, not just knowing the why.
Okay, so bringing this home. For us, living our lives today, dealing with our own struggles, seeing suffering around us, trying to live out our faith. What's the takeaway from this deep dive into Job's beginning? How does this apply?
That's the vital question, isn't it? I think what's really transformative is that it encourages us, maybe even compels us, to approach suffering our own and others very differently, with more humility maybe, less certainty about why things happen.
Yeah, challenging those quick assumptions we make.
Exactly. Questioning that automatic link we often draw between sin and suffering, or righteousness and immediate reward. It forces us to admit that God's ways are often far more complex, far more mysterious than our neat little theological boxes allow. Sometimes things happen that just don't fit the formula. And ultimately, it's a profound invitation to deepen our trust in God's character, His goodness, His justice, His wisdom, even when we can't fully grasp His methods, even when life feels chaotic and unexplained. It's a call to move beyond that simplistic cause and effect thinking when we face pain or see puzzling prosperity, and to embrace a more complex, more trusting faith in a God who is sovereign over a world that often defies easy explanations. It's about finding security in Him, even amidst the mystery.
That's incredibly helpful. What a journey just through these first parts of Job. We've really unpacked how this book is this amazing, sophisticated thought experiment designed to make us wrestle with our core assumptions about God and suffering. We saw how the Satan is presented more as an adversarial role within God's counsel, not necessarily the ultimate evil figure, and how his challenge kicks off the whole debate. And we've seen how the prologue sets up this profound tension around God's justice and suffering, pushing us way beyond simple ideas of retribution.
And maybe here's a final thought to chew on. If the book of Job isn't ultimately giving us a neat formula to explain why we suffer, if it's actually challenging how we think about suffering and God's role in it, then maybe, just maybe, our deepest comfort isn't found in having all the answers, in figuring out all the whys. Perhaps the most profound comfort comes from trusting the character of the God who is infinitely wiser, infinitely bigger, and infinitely more loving than any question we could ever ask, any formula we could devise. It's about finding our rest not in complete understanding, but in complete trust in His sovereign goodness, even when mystery remains.
Wow. Trusting the who, not just knowing the why. That's a powerful place to land. Thank you so much for walking us through that. And thank you all for joining us on this deep dive today. We really hope this encourages you to keep wrestling with these incredible truths in Scripture, letting them shape how you see God and navigate your own life. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep trusting.